Hello guys, this is Akash from the Big Data Guy and welcome to your 7th Spark tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to explore a function called GroupBy in RDD and how to read RDD documentation as promised in last tutorial. So let's get started. So to do that, let's start PySpark notebook so that we can access our Jupyter notebook. I have cleared up the folder from our last tutorial. However, if you haven't, don't worry about it. You can still do the work in the existing Jupyter notebook. So let's get started. Suppose that you have weather data like this that I have printed over here, and you have weather RDD, which is weather data. Fine, this is what you have. Still it's processing and it's starting a kernel in notebook. That's why it's going to take some time before we can execute this piece of code. So yeah, suppose that you have this data over here and you have a RDD over here, and you want to group by a particular date and see the different stations and their weather data points. Then how do you do that in RDD? So all you need to do for that is basically say that weather RDD dot group by lambda data of 0 dot map values list dot collect. So what we have done is that we have said that we would like to group by a particular date, which in this case, which is the 0th element in each of our RDD elements, 0th key in each of our RDD element, and then we would like to map whatever result that we get from group by as a list. And if we end up seeing that, seeing over here, then it's going to be on 24th you have all this data point, and on 25th you have all this data point. Now what's the point of doing this? Well, sometimes if you just want to combine all the data by a particular key, you can use group by. But there is another type of function that you might want to use in this case, which is suppose that you have a particular date and a station, and then you want to find out a minimum or maximum temperature at a particular station on a particular date. Then what you can do is that you can use group by function, which is weather RDD dot map lambda data. So here what we are trying to do is we are basically trying to make a particular element a key in our data. So if we collect this value, then you realize that we have a date and a station name as a key and corresponding weather degree as a value by this map function. So now what we are going to do is just we are going to use a function called group by key, and then we are going to map value min dot collect, and then the map values dot min dot collect, and this should give you minimum weather on a particular date at particular weather station. And you can see on 24/07/2018 in Rochester the minimum weather was 10, which apparently is correct. And then on 24 in Syracuse the minimum weather was 15, and then on following day it was 18, and you can see that we have got that on 25/18 and on 24/15. You can also get the max value by just mapping the Python function max to a particular list. What else can you do? Well, you can like change this object and then pretty much say that I want to have two different keys, which is this two key data 0 and data 1 as the key of my group by function, and it should get you on a particular, oh sorry, data 1 is the station name, not data 2. It should get you a date and a station name as a key, and then basically get you corresponding data on a particular date, particular station, and then you can work around with it. But the group by key function, what it allows you to do is that if you have a particular key defined in your data points, in this case we had a particular key defined which was our date and a station name, and then value was the temperature, you could map a particular function on it. However, I want to mention that group by function is not efficient when it comes to doing some sort of aggregation operations like this in the PySpark environment, PySpark RDD environment, not data frame environment. We are going to explore how group by function would be very, very helpful when it comes to PySpark data frame environment in future. But for the case of RDD, it's one of that function that exists, and I don't know what the use case would be, because so far in my experience as a data scientist, I have not used PySpark RDD group by function a lot. And part of the reason is that reduce by key function or aggregate by key function is much more efficient than group by function in PySpark RDD implementation. And it can also be read from the documentation of PySpark, which we are going to see how to read in a few moments of time. So how would you write this piece of code in reduce by key format? Well, it's pretty much simple. Reduce by key dot collect, I think. So lambda data, all we want to do is that we want to list it. Okay, list takes at most one argument, two argument given. Comma b, and you want to return a plus b. So there we go. In this case, what we have done is that we have summed up all of this function, but what we can do is instead, I'm a bit confused in terms of how to use reduce by key. Yeah, there we go. So we could group each of the so let's represent it a bit differently. So we are just going to now have a list as a value, and now we have a particular group over here, and then basically do a min. Or in this case, we don't even need to have a list, and then given a comma b, what we can have is basically min of a comma b, and this should give you minimum temperature. Sorry, yeah, so I hadn't used reduce by key in a long time, so yeah, did get a bit confused about how to use reduce by key function. So reduce by key, as we have covered in our first tutorial, is basically a function which reduces by a key, and then you have two elements, and you need to define what you want to do with this two element. In this case, we want to find the minimum of this two element, and then basically use it as the value to find the minimum value, or you could find a maximum value. So when it came to a word count program, we used reduce by key, and in reduce by key, all we needed to do was a plus b, because what we are looking for is basically total cumulative counts of number of times a word happened in a word count program. But in this case, what we are looking for is a minimum value at a particular key, which is our date and a station. So basically, given to key, we want to return a minimum value key, and that's what you're finding. Vice versa, you could use max, it would return the max. So yeah, sorry, I did get confused, but in this situation, what you can do is go to PySpark documentation, PySpark RDD documentation to understand how to call particular commands. So one of my favorite documentation is PySpark version 1.1 documentation, but I would rather suggest that you use 2.1, or maybe let's use 2.1. 2.1 documentation that is much more clear. So here you go and click on RDD, and basically all these functions are something that you could execute on top of RDD. So in this case, once you have parallelized your list and created an RDD, you could execute Cartesian, cache, coalesce, co-group, collect, whatever. So it's basically going to be rdd.collect or rdd.collect as map, or rdd dot, count, anything that you want to do. It's basically going to be rdd dot something. So this is what PySpark class RDD does, and it's very simple to use documentation. All you need to do is go and whatever function you're looking at, like pretty intuitive. Like if you're looking at distinct elements, it will define what this function does, and then it will give you an example. And the best part about PySpark documentation is that if you were to copy this code as it is and then execute it in your Jupyter notebook, you will get the results like clearly. This is how you get the results. Unlike other documentation where you need to have some code above and some code below to get the results, and then you could execute a piece of code, in PySpark documentation, one of the best part is that as they have written these examples, you can copy them as it is and it would give you the result. So all the documentation you need is here, and you could look at all different type of functions that you want, and it's pretty intuitive. So check this out. I also often use PySpark 1.1 documentation because when I started learning Spark, this is what I used to do, and it pretty much contains all the functions of PySpark 2.1.0 documentation. And the part that I like about this documentation is that all of this is pretty organized. PySpark RDD 1.1.0 documentation. Here you can basically look at each of the function and what it does. It's a pretty nice description, and then you want to go out and basically see how to play around with this function or how to use this function. You could click on it and then it will take you to a detailed explanation and an example. That's why this documentation is famous, and all you well, not famous, but it's my favorite compared to this documentation. And all you need to do is just type PySpark RDD documentation and it should show up, and you could pretty much use it as it is. So yeah, that's it for this tutorial. Please go through PySpark RDD documentation, because I'm not going to cover any more RDD functions. I think I already covered most of the basic RDD function that you are going to be using in your normal life as a data scientist when writing the PySpark program. I don't think you'd be needing a lot of other function unless you are doing some specific type of programming than the ones that we have already covered so far in our past 6 to 7 tutorials. So yeah, if you need any more functions, documentation is your friend. Go through, read it, whatever suits you, either 2.1.0 or 1.1.0 documentation. This would be more updated version, so I would recommend that you get used to this documentation, but I'm just kind of, you can say, old school. Don't like change that much, so pretty much I kept using this documentation instead of this documentation. But yes, So for example, today we covered the group by function, and if we go see PySpark documentation in this case, it will only tell you an example, and that's it pretty much. You don't know what else. But then also this does not have a group by key function that we covered today. That function only exists in this documentation because that they created a new one over here. And then notice that they also have a note that basically tells you performance wise, if you were to do some sort of aggregation type of function, sum or averages over each key, then using reduce by key or aggregate by key will provide much better performance compared to this one. So yeah, there you have it. That's it for this tutorial, guys. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon on the side so that you keep getting the notification when I upload a new video. And I will be uploading new video from now on every week once, most probably on Saturdays. So stay tuned. Thank you. Bye for now.